The 2024 election revealed a more nuanced America. Party lines have been blurred, and traditional red blue distinctions won't cut it anymore for decision makers. Instead, leaders must understand the gray to know the new America and succeed in it. Hi, welcome to Insights to Activate, Ipsos' series focusing on some of the biggest topics facing the world today. I'm Ben Meyerson, Director of Marketing and Communications here at Ipsos, and I'll be your host as we talk about how you and your brand can know the new America, the one that's not often seen in corporate boardrooms or at elite gatherings. We have a group of amazing experts here today from the Ad Council, the National Association of Veterans Research and Education Foundations, and Ipsos. All of them can help your business find its way through this unprecedented era. But before we get to our panel, let's take a moment to talk about some key realities you need to know to navigate the new America. First, distrust in institutions is creating opportunities for brands to step up. There's been a huge drop in the number of Americans who trust the CDC since 2020, among other agencies. But the distrust creates a unique opening for businesses to help fill that gap by using direct and accountable relationships with consumers. Second, Americans are concerned about the cost of living, along with tariffs and job security, and that's made people more focused on affordability and stability. Consumers are actively seeking leaders that prioritize American jobs, invest in local economies, and demonstrate a commitment to domestic manufacturing and fair wages. Third, words matter more than ever. Consumers are watching brands closely, and they expect you to take clear and thoughtful positions. And they'll be quick to jump on anything that's inconsistent or performative. A misstep in language, branding, or positioning can quickly cause a major backlash. So, to succeed in the nuanced new America, businesses need to not only recognize these shifts, but also adapt their strategies to build lasting consumer trust and market resilience. Let's meet our panel and get into it.
Hello, I'm Cherise Nunez, Chief Insights and Analytics Officer for the Ad Council. It's good to be with you today.
My name is Rashi Romanoff. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the National Association for Veterans Research and Education Foundations. Excited to chat.
I'm Clifford Young. I'm President of Polling and Societal Trends at Ipsos. It's great to be here.
Thanks, everybody. I'm excited to get into this a little bit. But Cliff, as our premier polling guy here, let's just call you that.
The polling guru.
The polling guru, the master of the numbers. Let's talk a little bit about this new America, right? So how did we get here, and is this a new America?
That's an awesome question, and there's many answers. But I would say, and we would say at Ipsos, first and foremost, it's a call to action. It's a call to action for leaders, for analysts like us, for people, to set aside our biases, our filters, to try not to see the world as red or blue. We do that all so much today, right? Not to see the world as black or white. And to understand that there's, as you said already, Ben, like there's nuance to things. There's gradations, there's gray. And indeed, at least from my perspective as an analyst, the elections in 2024 showed this. Indeed, the mandate that came out of that was interesting and complex, and we should understand that that's a face of America. It's not the only America. There's many Americas, but it's an interesting face to America. And let me give you an example of this nuance. And it's actually data from a poll that we published together with the New York Times recently. It's on immigration, a very controversial issue, obviously. It's, in our assessment, the most important political determinant in the United States today. But there's nuance there. Indeed, on the one hand, 87% of Americans believe that illegal immigrants who are also criminals should be deported. That makes sense. Everyone can agree on that. But when it comes to children, only a weak plurality agree. So again, just an example, and we have many examples across many domains of this nuance, of this sort of micro differentiation, but a great example of how Americans are complex and nuanced.
So like when you see that level of polarization, but split in different ways, with the gray in the middle, what do people do when they see that? Like you've seen these numbers, you live in these numbers every day, and you're out there sharing this with people. So what kind of ways should folks act on this kind of data? What are some ways that you speak to people and say, okay, so here's the reality and here's what you do with it? What do you do when folks ask you that follow-up question?
That's a great question. Many answers, once again, to that great question. Again, try to set aside our initial starting point. Everyone looks at America as extremely polarized, red or blue, and it is. We can't deny that fact. You have to be careful where you step. There's a lot of minefields out there. Indeed, you said words matter, and words do matter in America today. But there, once again, is nuance. And understanding where that gray area is, where you can kind of push your organization, push your messaging, push your branding is critical. I'll give you an example. There are a core set of values that we've found in our own research that everyone agrees on. They're not polarizing. And let me give you some examples. Freedom, fairness, responsibility, civility. These are values that 90% plus of Americans agree on. That's a place, that's a reservoir, I would say, that organizations can take advantage of if they frame it to their advantage.
Rashi, I'm going to throw to you now. So at NAVREF, you do a lot of things that are operating at the intersection of some really important areas in the new America. So you're working with public health, but also you're working with veterans, who are a really key group that a lot of folks are trying to reach. Are you and NAVREF finding that you're able to break through and make new bonds with the administration and the world right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what's really interesting, and I think building off of Cliff's point, I love the idea words matter. I think that's incredibly powerful. And I think one of the things we're learning, not just about veterans, but about all patients and all citizens that are consuming information, is that it's not only that the words matter, but who conveys those words and who your messenger matters, who your messenger is matters. And so at NAVREF, we work at the intersection of partnerships. So we're working to bring more research opportunities into the VA so that veterans' health and well-being can be improved, and we're advancing veterans' overall health. And I think one of the things that's been really interesting in how we connect with that population is thinking about who our messengers are. And that can be incredibly powerful. So I think survey after survey has shown that people trust their healthcare provider, right? That's a place where people go to for accurate information. I think one thing we see in the veteran population is also this sense of community among other veterans. So veteran service organizations, organizations where people are able to be with other people who have also had that shared experience of service is incredibly, incredibly powerful. So from time and again, we're constantly hearing from veterans and their family members saying, I actually learned about this, preventive medication, or I learned about this research opportunity from another veteran who was also going through the same thing. So I think we're entering a phase where it might not be the right information at the right time at the right place, but making sure that we're making that messenger is the right person for the patient to be able to absorb that information.
And so you talk about messengers and also being the right person at the right place at the right time. How are you adjusting the way that you work with your messaging in this era? And are you finding that it's helping connect with folks?
Yeah, I think empowering veterans to speak about their own experience is really, really powerful. And I think it's something that other patients relate to. In some of the work that Ipsos did with VA's Million Veteran Program, which is the largest and most diverse genetic biobank in the entire world, when we asked veterans, well, what motivated you to sign up to participate in this? Their answer was helping other people, helping other veterans. And so I think making sure that we're engaging the population of people we're trying to reach is really, really critical for getting these key messages across. I don't know that people necessarily want to just see experts behind a stage talking about what's best for them. I think they want to relate to people and they want to connect with people that have had a very similar experience, and that's the messenger that might be most appropriate.
I just want to jump in and say our research, additional research, not just the research we do for you and for the VA, but our research reinforces this point. Basically, there are these values that everyone shares. I mentioned them, but also mission-based professions are one of the few things that unite people. Whether you're military, you're a veteran, you're a police officer, you're a firefighter, you give back to the community. Americans can get behind that, and it unites them.
Mm-hmm.
And we do every year we do a poll that talks about how much people trust different professions. And like we've got data that bears that out, right? Like doctors are among some of the most trusted folks out there. And I think that really ties into what you're saying. It really like has vindicated that for years, right, Cliff?
Yeah, doctors, firefighters, policemen, as I said, pollsters, not so much. Pollsters are way down there with the press and with politicians, but let's set that aside for a second. Yes, these mission-based professions are really held highly in Americans' eyes.
Mm-hmm. And what I really liked what you said about nuance, in the veteran population, there's more than 20 million veterans in the United States. So regardless of red, blue, purple designations, this is not a cohesive voting bloc. It's a population that's aging. They live in all 50 states, 6 territories. So there's a lot of variation and nuance around how people want to get their information and then how they want to make healthcare decisions or other decisions for their families. So that nuance, I think, is really important.
And Rashi, I'm going to ask you, if you can for a second, kind of talk a little bit about how you play into the VA system through NAVREF. Like where do you sit in the ecosystem as you're working on helping folks get this stuff?
Yeah, so a big part of what we try to do is really articulate what the VA is about, so that we can be bringing in more partners, bringing in more life-saving drugs, bringing in different ways of delivering healthcare to this, nation's largest integrated healthcare system. So whether it's clinical trials and new life-saving medications, whether it's opportunities to provide new kinds of training to healthcare providers and veterans, NAVREF really exists to do all of those kinds of works and bring in the best and brightest of the public and private sector to advance veterans' health.
Yeah. So really, like you're in a place to facilitate that kind of trust that's so needed to help this move forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Sharice, I'm going to throw to you now and talk a little bit about how you help facilitate those conversations too. So you work with the Ad Council. Obviously, so much of your message is about communication as well. And you're really all about informing audiences. So to do that, though, you've got to figure out the best ways to reach people.
Yes.
So have you adjusted at all the way that you message or help people message in the new America?
We haven't adjusted. I would say what has been core to the work that we've been doing from an insights and analytics perspective has always been understanding the needs of the audience, doing very deep, rich insight market research to understand what's important, what the need gaps are, what the pain points and the tensions are related to a specific issue. And we've done extensive work with Ipsos. Really, I can talk to so many different areas where we focus, but let's talk about COVID per se, which was a very intense time for the nation, a public health crisis, a lot of concern, divides on the topic. And so it really required in-depth research that helped to really get to the core understanding of what the need gaps were, to develop a message that would resonate. And it was really about getting informed, regardless of where you sat on the spectrum of interest in getting the COVID-19 shot. It was important that our research, it was important that we brought to bear their needs in a relevant way and in a respectful way, objectively, so that the message would be received.
And so let's talk about that a little bit here, if I can prod a little bit. So you're talking about getting out a message that is something that is a new message in a lot of ways to people, and a message that's very important, but that some folks might not be on board with. Right. There are some parallels, certainly, to some other things that are happening in the world right now today. So what kind of ways do you talk about getting that message out so you can get that connection through to people and really get an action that's positive in the world?
Well, the way we get the message out, there's several ways. There's the air game and then there's the ground game. So obviously through national media reach, as well as digital reach, but then also connecting with various localities where the issues and the concerns may be greater. We do ground game work to make sure that we're connecting with the audiences where they are and where the needs are greatest. But I will just double down on the more important thing is focused on the understanding and the listening, not necessarily pushing a message to convince, but reinforcing a message that helps to address the information needs of the audience.
I think that's such an interesting point. So when you talk about listening and getting a message out to folks in a way that they can connect with better, right? You're not starting from zero and convincing somebody. You're coming to people that already have an idea about things, and then meeting them where they are, and then getting them to take one step further versus 10 steps further.
Exactly.
So when you are looking at folks and talking about messaging, do you tailor that to folks in different sectors? In different areas? Are you doing different messaging? Are you doing different techniques for different regions?
The message is tailored based on the audience. So,
Nuance.
Exactly. There's always nuance. And I mean, similar to what was mentioned, it's not only the message, but it's also the messenger. But the audience, various audiences have different needs, different perspectives on the topic, different barriers. And as you mentioned, have to be met where they are in their given understanding of the issue. And again, what is most important to them about the issue.
And so you're on the insights side of things. So your job is to gather that information and then to tailor that message. So what kind of things do you do to help make sure that messaging reaches folks?
Very intense, research. It's hours and hours of listening and then translating all of that information into an actionable recommendation on here's what is going to be best, most salient and most relevant for the audience. And then who do they want to hear this message from? More often than not, it's people that are close to them. People trust people that are in their circle. So even if it is a medical professional, it's their personal doctor, not necessarily just any doctor. Or it could be people in the localities. The community is a very important way to ensure that we're reaching the individuals as well.
Rashi, when you're talking about reaching folks through your messaging too, does this ring true to you in terms of tailoring and making sure you're meeting folks where they are?
Absolutely. And I think, it was so interesting when you were saying that, because one of the things that we've seen in the veteran population is the importance of family caregivers, right? It might not just be the veteran patient who's showing up to their appointment or to their screening, but it's their wife or their husband, the person who drove them there. They might be the person who's actually more engaged in that patient's healthcare. And so one of the things that I think the VA has done really effectively is try to engage that family unit in the care of the veteran themselves, because exactly to your point, sometimes it's the spouse or the adult child in the room who's saying, no, you are on that medication, or yes, you do need to try, exercising more, or no, you're not actually really exercising that much, or you are having problems sleeping. You need sort of, healthcare can sometimes be a team sport. And I think having all of those perspectives in the room and engaged is really important.
I just want to reinforce the points made here. Really, Knowing the New America is about using good research practices. So before you respond, you listen, then you learn. It's going out there and putting your ear down, listening what people are saying. Indeed, we have many examples leading up to the election where public officials didn't do that, right? And just using an example of the economic scenario in 2023 and 24. The administration was talking a lot about how the economy was getting better. Look at all the indicators, inflation and unemployment. But when we did focus groups, people were saying, we are hurting. We can't make ends meet. And so again, just as a proof point, just to emphasize the point, go out and listen to people, break out of your bubble, learn by listening before you respond.
Yeah, and there has to be an intentionality around wanting to communicate in the objective perspective versus asserting a particular position. And I think that is another reason why we are seeing within society, to some degree, a level of distrust, because there hasn't been a listening, there hasn't been an intentionality of acknowledging what the voice of people are saying, where the needs and the concerns are. It's been more of a positioning and asserting a particular position versus listening to the audience.
And people are complex.
Very.
People have nuance. I mean, indeed, I'm the pollster, so I'm going to use political examples. But people in given states voted in favor of abortion on the ballot and voted for Trump. That's natural in America. There's nuance.
And I'm going to go back to the point of trust, right? We have this thing that we've talked about, the system is broken index, and how and how that really has it often rises significantly before elections, right? Can you talk about that a little bit, Cliff? I know you live in that space.
I live in that space. I actually developed it way back in the day when I lived in Brazil to understand Latin America, had forgotten about the index, and then 2015 dusted it off and reapplied it here in the US. But what it basically shows is that in a broad sense, there's a widespread belief that the system is broken. It no longer works for the average person. The system is rigged. By the way, you can hear the messaging, hear the rhetoric there. And there's a desire for strong leaders, even if they break the rules, they need to break the rules to take the country back. Widespread systemic distrust, and that's kind of the context we live in. By the way, it's just not an American phenomenon, it's a global one. And ultimately, we can think of the negative side to that, problems with governance, problems with building consensus, whether it be at the national level or inside companies, on an organizational level. But they're upside too. And brands and organizations that are strong are important beacons of light in this vacuum of trust. Because brands are still trusted. Indeed, our own research shows that brands far outperform people, places, and other things in a relative sense. People don't like celebrities, they don't like politicians, but they do like their trusted brands. So how you use that's another question. How you operationalize that, obviously, each company, each brand has to decide what it is, has to contextualize it. But it is a beacon of hope for people because it's a trusted reference point.
Yeah, and that's something we talk about a little bit. I touched on it a little bit at the top of the webinar here, but we really there is a space here for brands to pick up some of the trust that's being left behind, maybe on the federal level, as these broader federal institutions shift. Right? There's daylight for big brands who have that trust from consumers to take advantage of that. If you are comfortable with this brand that's been in your house for years, it's always been there. Maybe the packaging has changed, but the flavors are the same, and they have a deep emotional place in your body. So that is a built-in place that folks can build off of.
Yeah, and I would just say nuance matters. Brands that have that trust, that credibility, don't want to assume the problems of society. That's problematic today, especially in a highly polarized world where words really matter. But just being that beacon of light, always being there for people, is super important in people's day-to-day lives.
I think it's a great point. I'm going to throw now, I think, let's see if we have any questions coming in from our audience. All right, there's a few here. Let's start with one for Cliff. So there's so much change right now. Do you think it's ever going to slow down?
I tell my kids that, and I think probably my parents told me that, and my grandparents told my parents that. Everything changes, but nothing changes. And indeed, on the change side, obviously, we look around, there's technology. I mean, I remember when I went to college, I'll date myself here, didn't have internet. We have internet. We have more than internet now, right? If you think about long-term social trends, the population's aging here in the United States and around the world. Birth rates are going down. In the United States and in Europe, in the Western world, the populations are becoming increasingly diverse from a racial and ethnic standpoint. So lots of change, right? But there's a lot of things that are constant as well. Indeed, most of the things that are constant are good and wholesome and self-reinforcing, reinforcing. They're virtuous. And I've already mentioned them, those central values. Integrity, civility, freedom, fairness. These are values that a supermajority of Americans believe in, 90% plus. They've always been around, and indeed, I was talking with an individual yesterday. They said maybe since the time of the caveman and woman, and they've been around. But they are once again a reservoir to unite. And those organizations and leaders that can frame them to their advantage will be in a good place. So yes, there's lots of change. But there's also an anchor or anchors, and those anchors are our fundamental understanding of our human experience.
Yeah, and I would just build that change is good. Sometimes change is necessary. Sometimes there's a need for to reset and to balance. Yes, change it's disruptive, but there can be a great deal of good that comes from change. And I think I guess I am the type of person that is a glass half full. So with every circumstance and situation, I think that we have to take the opportunity to figure out how do we leverage the change and the dynamic and the tension for the greater good, for the work that you're doing for society.
Yeah, and I was just, I think change can be really good. And I think one of the things you said at the beginning, I think for brands and for organizations, as much as the environment might be changing, staying true to your mission is also really important, because I think sometimes there can be fads or trends or things that are coming up that might seem like they're important or seem like they're here to stay. And I think ensuring that whatever that is still in line with what your organization is meant to do and why people come to you is really important. So, for NAVREF and for VA, support for veterans is probably one of the last bastions of things in this nation that everybody agrees on, right? It has a tremendous amount of goodwill. I know I'm honored to serve this community each and every day. Wanting to stay true to that, nonpartisan delivery of high quality healthcare for our service members is really critical. And sometimes that might mean not responding to every changing wind of what's going on.
And yet, like the VA and the Ad Council to some extent,
Yes.
you're both organizations that have been around for a long, long time. So there has been by necessity modernization that happens to survive. So, I mean, you've got to find that balance, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Authenticity, right? And many times authenticity means, constancy or consistency, right? Which is sort of antithetical a bit to change. Lots of change can be good, lots of change around us, but those things are constant, are also good, they're also important.
Somebody once told me that it's not so much about having, going into the hospital or going in to see your doctor and having it be exactly the same every time, but it's about having it be predictable, right? So I think some of this, when it comes to this changing environment, thinking about what industry you're in and what is it that your customer ultimately wants. And in some moments, that customer wants something that feels predictable. It's not something that they're walking in and every time it's a new process, it's a new check-in. That predictability for some brands is very, very important.
That's great. All right, let's see what else we've got from our audience here. All right, Rashi here, I'll have you tackle the next one here. So we talked earlier about how people are losing trust in institutions. How can you earn that back?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, actually. I believe last year, trust in the VA was at an all-time high. And so I think one of the reasons that is happening, or that happened at the VA, was because it was an investment in the people-facing services. So one of the things that happened for VA was as a result of the PACT Act, which was all about bringing more services and more benefits to veterans who might have experienced a toxic exposure, VA was able to do a tremendous amount of hiring. So suddenly, rather than maybe just having that 6 to 7 minutes with your primary care doctor, you're able to interact with a whole range of different specialists at the VA and seek out care. So I think part of enhancing and engaging and increasing trust is about increasing those touch points that you have with your customer or with your patients, so that predictability and that dialogue and that journey that you're on with them feels familiar, and it feels like people that are really engaged in your patient care journey. Secondly, I think how you're engaging that whole community. So things like the steps they've taken to engage family caregivers and family members and recognize that they're a part of the care team is also really, really critical. So there's lots of opportunities, I think, to think about trust, and I think lots of different ways to define trust, but starting with what are patients telling me and how am I listening and implementing what their advice is, I think is the first place to go.
So the VA trust in the VA aligns more with how people think of their primary care doctor than how people think of the federal government then, in terms of where it nets out on the trust scale.
I think it's a little bit of both, because I think it's, when they've asked the question, they ask about trust in the VA. They don't say trust in your primary care doctor. And so I think parts of this is, seeing things like expanded benefits or make you trust that organization. Saying, hey, this is an organization that's looking out for me, I think is really important. Are there things that the VA can be doing better? Absolutely. Can they be doing different things to reach patients in different ways? For sure. But I do think that engagement and that dialogue and hearing from veterans and saying, okay, we might have to change how we're delivering some of this messaging or some of these services. Maybe we can leverage some telehealth modalities to do this. I think hearing that feedback and being able to respond to it is really critical.
I have a friend and neighbor actually who's a beneficiary of the PACT Act, and I was talking to her about it a little bit and just what she went through to be at that level where she is receiving those benefits now. And she spoke kind of hushed, like, yeah, you know, I went through some things that now allow me to be a beneficiary of this, but now as a result of that, I have even more care and even better care than I've ever had before, and I will for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and just to build on, we talked about change and then we talked about consistency. When I think about building trust for the Ad Council, a brand that's been around addressing social cause issues since 1942, and addressing it in a way that is meeting the needs of the people. You're seeing a response and engagement across a host of different social cause issues for decade upon decade. So there's continuity with the equity of being reputable, being a source of valid and relevant information, and again speaking to the most dire social cause issues throughout decades is one area. Yes, as a brand, that's where you want to maintain that consistency of your equity. And when you remain core to those equity elements that resonate with the audience, that's a way to continue to maintain trust versus deviating too much.
Yeah. Well, and if certainly, folks have seen the name, the Ad Council, everywhere all the time for most of their lives. I mean, I remember I was a DJ on a college radio station, and once an hour we had to play a public service announcement. And we had a big disc, a big stack of CDs from the Ad Council, and it was just like it was always fun. I had my favorites that I would play. One was about trampoline safety, but obviously it just goes to show the scope of Ad Council messaging and how many different causes there are out there. Again, going from the COVID vaccine to trampoline safety, or
Right.
there was another piece that was Anthony Hopkins talking about cancer prevention. Just so many different causes on.
Smokey the Bear.
Yes,
Smokey the
of
Bear.
course, Smokey the Bear.
Can't forget about him.
Cannot forget about Smokey the Bear.
He still lives on.
Yes, yeah, it's Smokey's got a fun story. I mean, the amount of trust that you've been able to build over so many years, I think is so crucial. I mean, and a lesson for any kind of brand.
Absolutely.
I'm going to take a plug for Ipsos as well. Sure. This is our 50th year. And we've been delivering on bringing voice to people all 50 of those years. I think we're credible doing that. Indeed, we're sitting here talking about the voice of the people, bringing the voice of the people to the fore, to decision makers. It's ultimately about not just delivering on your promise, it's doing that consistently, as everyone said.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, we've worked with both of these folks as well, talking to them about how to help them get their messaging and build that trust. I mean, that's something that I think is so important out there. I mean, we're talking about the best ways to do it every day. But yeah, anyway, moving on from the plug section here, I'm gonna actually go back to you again, Charisse. I think with the next question I saw here. Yeah, this is definitely for you. So, with so many different groups that you're talking to, who you're talking to is a really important signal about what's happening in the world. Is there anything that you're working on that you think is particularly important for this moment?
I would say mental health. We have a wide array, as you mentioned, of social cause issues that we are engaged in. Mental health is one area that continues to grow, and we continue to get it expanded support base to extend that to various audiences. So, the campaign, started with the multicultural audiences and is now extending to the LGBTQ audiences, men, which has been a huge gap. So and children, of course, youth being a very core area. So we have that. What's one campaign I would say that, given what's happening in society with all the change, with all that the country has been through over the last since COVID and beyond, mental health continues to be a pillar that is continuing to expand. So I'd say that is one huge pillar that continues to expand and grow, and that we're constantly doing in-depth research across a wide array of different audiences to ensure that we're meeting their needs and reaching them effectively.
And so are you working with any particular foundations there or other groups that you're helping drive that messaging? What are the different ways that you're tailoring the way you reach out to these folks, and is it of this moment?
The tailoring is mostly through the audience definition and reach. And then, yes, various organizations, some are more focused nationally, but we are finding a lot that are really um, seeking for, because our scope has historically been national scale, large scale national efforts and campaigns. We are seeing more um, requests to focus on local initiatives. So in the state of Georgia, so building on what we're doing nationally, but also amplifying it at the local level.
Um, Cliff, we've done work with various mental health organizations too, like polling on what kind of mental health state we're in as a country right now. I mean, what are we seeing from mental health, and has that shifted at all in the new America?
No, I wouldn't say it has shifted as of recently, but it is a growing concern among Americans. We do a public health tracker, and it's one of the top issues that Americans cite. We are increasingly having more clients come to us that are in that space, wanting to know what public opinion ultimately thinks. I think there's a growing understanding among Americans about what it is. The social stigma around it is still there. But it's decreasing, especially among Gen Zers. They're oh so ready to tell you that they have an issue, right? At least I'm thinking of my kids, but truly our data suggests that. I would say the issue of social isolation, which hadn't been thought of as a mental health predictor or determinant, really is a focus today. And so yes, there's a broad-based understanding among decision makers, and public opinion is increasingly, I would say, socialized and conditioned to think about it.
And mental health is a huge issue in the veteran population. And I think it's one of those areas where the data can tell really powerful stories in different ways. So, seeing the call volumes go up for the Veterans Crisis Line, or seeing more people request or demand mental health care services. One story might say, oh my God, are people in crisis? But the other story is, hey, people are seeking out help and they're getting connected to care. So I think it's an area where the data tells these really interesting stories.
Okay, I think we've got another question here. Time for one more. All right, so everyone had their one, so let's go to the group here. So if I'm a Fortune 500 company right now, what should I do right now in the new America? Should I talk more or less?
Over to me.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, the easy question last. It depends. And now, first and foremost, there is nuance, obviously, but there is polarization. And we did talk about words matter, and you need to be careful, right? Words today about people, places, and things trigger people. People have been conditioned to think in one way or another, blue or red, and you have to be careful about that if you're CEO. But we've talked about this as well. You should be authentic to who you are. People value that, even if they disagree with you. Try to align yourself with your values and be true to your values. And the last point I would make is sort of independent of that sort of polarization spectrum we've talked about a bit, right? Red and blue and the issues that kind of fall along that continuum. There are these fundamental values. Freedom, fairness, integrity, responsibility, civility, that all Americans hold as essential. And to the extent that you can take your company, your organization, and frame those values to your advantage, and to ensure that you're not violating them, which is perhaps even more important, you'll be in a good place. So ultimately, complex answer to a simple question, be true to yourself, worry about the cognitive and semantic landmines, but tap into those core values.
Sharice, you're in the messaging space. What do you think?
My bias is always listen first. Listen first. I think it's incredibly important that there be conversations, because sometimes, even we're talking about a brand, and there's in the organization, and then there's messaging outside to the organization. So I'll speak first to within the organization. I think it's the listening and the conversation versus a directive message. Listening to conversation, I think, is very important. And I think we did mention it, identifying where we can get the common ground, and do not assume. I think in many instances, I've seen a lot of assumptions, even with what we're seeing now in the landscape. Many people will assume that everyone is on, that your circle, most people in your circle are in one space. And as you mentioned, it's nuance. That's not always the case. So the listening, open the floor for conversation. And once you've done that, you identify your core message that's in line with the needs, and then proceed.
Yeah. Listen, learn, respond. Listen, learn, and then respond. That's what we've been talking about today. Yes. Yeah. Rashi, what do you think? I mean, so you're in the business of making big swings and helping communicate those. What advice would you give to folks that are operating maybe a little bit further separated from the nuances of the federal government?
Yeah, I think right now there's this urge, or maybe because things feel like they're changing so quickly, of wanting to communicate or talk about everything. And I think one of the things running a nonprofit that I often think about is, one, is commenting on this or is saying something about it true to our mission? So is this something that, aligns with our organization's goals? Two, is this something that, I'm the expert in, and it makes sense for me to comment on it? And three, is my commenting on it going to make an impact, or are there other people that are potentially better suited to talk about it? I know I'm from Pittsburgh. I could talk about the Steelers all day long. I don't know that somebody wants a nonprofit executive to be talking about football. So I don't know that I'm the best messenger of that. But I think it's thinking about those three questions and how effective and how elevating your voice can be to the national dialogue is really important. And knowing, hey, I think this is the moment for me to speak up, and hey, this might be a moment for another organization who's better suited, I think is really important.
That is great analysis. I would use that every day. All right.
You can ask me about the Steelers anytime you want.
I think we'll do that after the webinar. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you all so much for joining us. I think we're at time. I just want to say it's been a great conversation, and I look forward to talking with you more in the future.
Wonderful.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us. If you haven't yet, you really should read our companion report on Knowing the New America, which talks about so many things we addressed today, but also drops hard data and analysis for sectors including CPG, technology, healthcare, and more. We have one more piece of this Insights to Activate series coming, a client impact story, talking about how Ipsos has worked with Axios to provide crucial data that powered an influential audience during a time of massive change. And join us after that for our next topic, artificial intelligence, and how leaders can bridge the enthusiasm gap. Thanks again for watching. I'm Ben Meyerson, and this has been Insights to Activate with Ipsos.